Welcome to Mariposa Rising. I'm Dr. Charissa D Pizarro, an Afro-Latina clinical psychologist, CEO, and nonprofit founder. This is where mental health, culture, and power intersect. We examine how power operates in systems, culture, and within ourselves, and how transformation begins when we reclaim our voice. This is Mariposa Rising, where healing is power. The information shared on this podcast is for educational purposes only, and it is not a substitute for therapy. Welcome back to the podcast, Mariposa Rising with Dr. Charissa D Pizarro. So we're at episode 4. We've talked about trauma, we've talked about silence, the cost of silence, the toll, and now we're going to get a little bit deeper into trauma and trauma responses. We spoke about these slightly earlier, but we're going to go more in depth. So trauma, a lot of you may be familiar with the book by Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score. Wonderful book, very true, very real. So we're going to talk about how trauma lives in your body, even if you don't realize it, even if you don't know it, or maybe you do. So you can understand exactly why you are the way you are. So you can understand exactly why you may be the way that you are, know your trauma history. So you might be wondering, with your trauma history or extreme stress, why do you react the way that you do? Why, if this is over, you still find yourself reacting in the same ways that you did when you were in the situation? Maybe why does your heart jump when somebody closes the door or slams the door? Maybe your heart races when you hear somebody's voice. Maybe you panic when somebody doesn't text you back. These subtleties, there's actually a reason for that behavior. Maybe you constantly feel on edge, exhausted, like you can't relax. Maybe you can't sleep at night or rest. Maybe you fall asleep and you don't rest. You don't wake up restored. Maybe you ask yourself, if this happened years ago, why am I still having these responses, this behavior? Well, trauma doesn't operate on logic. It's actually in a different part of our brain. So we have two hemispheres. We have the left, which is usually for language and a lot more things, but just to keep it simpler. And then we have the right, where the nonverbal memories and experiences are stored. And on the right side is where trauma is stored. So we have to access that when we're going to work on trauma. So as a psychologist, a big part of my job is to explain how trauma works, how trauma memories, behaviors in response to it, even the subtle ones that you may not think are related to trauma. Like, for example, the getting a little angsty when you don't get a reply from a text, or being on edge, or like expecting something to happen because some outside environmental trigger is telling your system that it's not safe. And sometimes it is indeed safe, but your body doesn't know that it is. So we have to remind it, we have to teach it. And something that's also important to keep in mind is that, for example, if you were in this trauma with somebody else, let's say it was in the home and your siblings are there, and you're like, well, why do I feel like this and so is not? Well, two different people could be in the same environment, grow up in the same family, experience the same things, but react completely different and have completely different perceptions and even completely different, slightly differing memories. So this is something to also keep in mind. You could be with a twin and you could still have different experiences of the same family, for example. So what matters most in these situations is how you process, how your mind processes the event, or how it doesn't process it. So when we face danger, like I was mentioning in another episode, our brain's job, our body's job, and all the different systems that do different jobs is to survive, like to protect us so that we can continue to survive. And behaviors that protect us were the ones that were evolutionarily passed down to us. So before, if somebody saw a bear, and I'll be using the bear example a few times, and if they were brave and tried to fight the bear and got eaten, that bravery genetic example is not going to get passed down because the person didn't survive. So the behaviors that get passed down are the ones that protect us from danger. And now we have less danger, theoretically, in society, but our mind still works in very much the same way. Your nervous system is consistently asking, am I safe? Am I okay? Can I stay here? It's a lot of different questions, but the root is, am I safe? If the answer is no, the brain shifts into survival mode. And what is survival mode? This is where you've probably heard these before. So there's different people add a little bit more, some will add a little bit less, but the core responses are fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and some people have collapse. But we'll focus on the 4 Fs. Fight is probably the easiest one to recognize because we might be doing these and not even know it. So I was talking about the bear. You see a bear, your nervous system says, danger, 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 it's not safe. So what do? When you fight, which in this situation is probably not a good idea, the person tries to fight the bear. Like, okay, well, this is a bear. It's not that big. It's a cub. So you try to shoo it away and you start fighting with it. Maybe not necessarily physically fighting with it, but you do something. You either go towards it or do something like that. But then the mom comes. So that doesn't work. And you take a step back and you're like, oh, wait, maybe it's not a good idea to fight. Let me instead flight. Because when you have a mama bear trying to protect her cub, guess what? You better get out of there. And that's what flight is. Like, you leave. Sometimes it could be physically leaving. Sometimes it could be your body, like your mind checks out. So that's something that's called dissociation, which we can talk about another episode. But flight is just getting the heck out of there. Usually physically, but not always physically. So something to also take into account is that flight, it could be leaving physically, it could be leaving your body, but it could also be anxiety because you feel like you have to get out of there ASAP. As soon as possible. Flight could be other things that we may not associate with trauma. So it could be overachieving. And I started to mention this at the beginning. It could be overworking. It could be always staying busy so that your mind is not there. You're doing something else so you can't pay attention to it. It could be never slowing down. And many of us, especially women, are praised for responses like that. Like overworking, overextending yourself, overachieving. Like, oh, wow, you did 2 of those instead of 1. Oh, thank you for making those copies. Could you get me some coffee now? It may sound simple, but these are part of trauma responses. And of course, not in isolation. We have to look at what's going on. So some might call this response being successful, being productive, being driven, being responsible. But sometimes it's survival. We're our nervous system trying to survive because we've learned from our environment in the past that this is what keeps us safe. If I stay moving, nothing's going to happen. If I stay busy, nothing's going to happen. And I also don't have to face my pain. The next F is freeze. So the freeze response, if we go back to the bear, is the thought that I can't get away from this. So I kind of just, the bear's right in front of me, but I'm there. I may be staring at it. I may be checked out, but my body is frozen. It cannot move. This is very similar. Well, it's the same thing as the deer in headlights. They know they're in danger, but they're just like there, staring you down. And the body essentially shuts down when this happens. And again, it might not be as obvious as I just said, like a deer in headlights, but in humans, it could look like feeling numb. So you froze those feelings, you can't feel anything. Procrastinating, avoiding decisions. And a lot of these are classified as avoidance responses. Struggling to take action, to make decisions, to take a choice. Many people criticize themselves for freezing, or they could view themselves as lazy, or other people can call them lazy. Like, you can't get to that. You're procrastinating. You're doing everything in your power to avoid it. That's part of a freeze response. Some people may think they're weak because of this, but you're not. You're just surviving. Unmotivated, some people might call it, but your nervous system is just trying to keep you safe. So let's be gentle with ourselves too, because our bodies were delicately designed to help us survive so that we can move on to procreate and keep the generations going. Our last F is fawn. So fawn, you see this a lot in, for example, my culture, where respect is so important. You have to respect your elders. You have to respect A, B, C, D, and then think about yourself. There's obedience. There's a huge promotion and reward, outside reward for obedience, and internal, because this is what we've internalized throughout the years. And I'm going to go into these as the episodes go on to talk about in more detail, but I just want to give you some examples of fawn, which is also a survival response. So fawn says, if everybody's happy, then I'll be safe. This happens a lot in abusive environments. Like, if you stay quiet, then you're safe. People pleasing, you're safe. You don't say no, you're safe. Putting everyone else's needs first, you're safe. This is not necessarily accurate, but this is how the mind looks at it. Constantly seeking approval. If she likes me, if my mom loves me, if my mom says XYZ, you did a great job, then I'm safe. Also, feeling responsible for other people's emotions. It's also within the fawn response. And a lot of people, especially women, get praised for the fawn response. But guess what? With the fawn response, eventually it gets exhausting because you can't even be yourself. You're too busy people pleasing. You're too busy trying to stay quiet. You're too busy maybe making yourself invisible. It gets exhausting. And you can lose yourself a little bit. Actually, most often that's what happens. You lose yourself. And we don't want that, right? We want to come into our own power. We want to heal. So how do we do it? Well, this is not an easy process. So I want to give you an example. I had this client, a little girl, extremely anxious. And she probably had a little bit of all of these responses because they're not mutually exclusive. The same person can experience different responses to different traumas or even to the same trauma if it's repeated. And the possibilities, honestly, are endless. So I had this client, 4 years old. Her grandfather, and I don't want to give you too much, he was physically abusive in the home with the women. So whenever he would come home from work, and this is what I was told, she would, before he came, like she knew how to tell time at 4, she would look at the time, go in the closet, hide. She was afraid of the dark, but guess what? She went into that closet anyway because it was safer. So that is flight because she would get away. But then her behavior also showed other symptoms, behaviorals, not symptoms, which were fawn. So she would go in the closet, hide. Her grandfather would pass by the living room, go. And then when she felt that it was safe to come out, she would come out. And this kid is 4, right? So how does she know all this? It's instinctual. It's her nervous system trying to keep her safe. And this happens with kids. This happens with adults. This happens with animals. And humans, of course, remember, are animals. So we all find a way to keep ourselves protected and safe. And this kid was pretty smart because she was, yes, the youngest, but the things that she did kept her without being physically abused. So this is very smart. In time, she learned to stay smaller. She learned to stay quiet. And I saw this client for a really long time. And these were things that we needed to work on. The grandfather wasn't in the home anymore, DCP&P gets involved, Child Protective Services, so then we actually can work on these things. But the little girl didn't know she was safe already because it's the same house, it's the same people minus the grandfather, so we had to teach her that she was safe. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Like in the situation of this child that I'm talking about, we did play therapy, sand tray therapy, and different things to access the right side of the brain. But some of us are not always so lucky to go to therapy early in the early years, like right after something happens, but we can still work on it later in therapy through these ways. Like adults also do sand tray. Adults also can do play therapy. There's adult-centered play therapy. And we can work on that. We just have to let our body know that we're safe. And that's really hard to do. You may not feel safe because your body was reacting this way and protecting you for such a long time, sometimes for years. And even when you're not in a situation, the thoughts, the feelings, the words that came with the trauma are there. So let's say somebody was in an abusive relationship, or even this little girl, she heard a lot of criticism, even if it wasn't directed at her. And we know that that's negative. So that keeps the body thinking that it's still in danger because we still remember. Consciously, our body stores these memories in different, not only in our brain, but also in different parts of our body, as we spoke about before. And also in the past, it was unpredictable when the abuse would show up. So what if this is just an unusually long period of silence? And silence in a good way, like non-violence silence. The body doesn't know because the trauma was so uncontrollable and so unpredictable. So how do we teach the body to feel safe? Well, first, we have to stop judging ourselves. This is if we're adults. For kids, we would have to teach them how to do that like in a developmentally appropriate way. But we have to remind ourselves, let's say an adult, let's say this little girl that was 4 is an adult and she moved out, she lives on her own, but she's super on edge. She has to teach her body that she's safe. And the goal isn't to shame ourselves like, why am I not over this yet? That doesn't help, actually. The goal is to understand our behaviors so that we may change them in time. And it takes time. I will always repeat that it takes time. Second, we need to reconnect with our bodies because we learned to keep certain things out so that we could feel safe. So we lost connection with certain feelings, bodily sensations, and things of that sort. And many trauma survivors, unfortunately, live entirely in their heads because they're trying to make an unpredictable environment more predictable. And healing often begins when we start paying attention to our bodies. So why does my head hurt all the time? Why am I so anxious? Why am I so on edge? Why is my heart beating so fast when I see whatever it may be? Even with a song. What happens when you're stressed? What happens when you're triggered? To learn how our body reacts to all these, just without judgment, to learn how our body reacts, and then what emotion follows, and in time we start to modify. So what is this? All of this that we're trying to notice, that's gaining awareness, gaining insight. And then we practice safety. Not just thinking we're safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. That's not necessarily going to work, although sometimes it does. But it's feeling it through healthy relationships, through resting, through respecting our boundaries, through setting boundaries, because some people didn't learn to set boundaries, through self-compassion. It's like nurturing that part of you that went through what it went through. And through these experiences in present day, we're teaching our body that it's safe. So today I want to leave you with this question. What survival response do you recognize in yourself after I gave you these responses? Do you have fight, flight, freeze, fawn? And what does it look like? Why do you classify it as one of the 4 Fs? And also be very gentle with yourself. Try not to judge. Remember, trauma is not your identity. Neither are your responses and your behaviors. This is gaining awareness to bring about change. And don't forget that once these kept you safe, they protected you. And now little by little, you have to teach yourself, your body, your nervous system, your brain that you are safe and you no longer need these responses. You can begin to trust. Whatever it is, filling the blank, you can learn to work. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.